We got seven different stories from seven different news outlets, guys. It's time for another episode of Regan's Newsround. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Reganelite here with another episode of Regan's Newsround, where I look at seven different news stories from seven different media outlets, and we do it all in this one video. And we start with The Guardian with the headline that tourists heading to Europe could face 14-hour queues at Dover from October. The new EU entry-exit system could lead to gridlock roads if the scheme goes ahead as planned, MPs here. Well, so first and foremost, obviously, this is obviously regarding Brexit. Or anything to do with Brexit is obviously something that we have to really talk about because it's one that people don't want to talk, don't want to hear. They don't want the white elephant to be spoken of, but we have to speak about the white elephant because people are going to suffer as a result of it and the actions that we chose to voted to leave the European Union. But the thing I always keep going back to, guys, is that people did not vote to leave the single market when we made that vote in 2016. Which is why the British public should be entitled to a second vote. But the other problem is that we have this situation where politicians don't want to talk about the problems of it. Both Conservative and Labour don't want to talk enough about it, and they'll just say that it's anything but Brexit. They won't outright point to Brexit, but they'll just say the relationship is different between us and the EU, is what they will try to obviously paint themselves. But in terms of this itself, I mean, if you are somebody who often travels to mainland Europe through Dover, whether it's driving through or not, I do question whether or not is it becoming worth it. You know, are you giving yourself enough time now? Because the time that you spend sitting in your car, or caravan or whatever it is you travel there, is it becoming worth it rather than just flying out? You know, it's just becoming more and more problematic, and Dover is still not ready for these. Dover is still not ready for this kind of setup in any way, shape or form. Which begging turns to start asking, well, what have the Conservatives been doing? And they've argued at the port that they don't have the systems in place to deal with these things, because in order for people to go through from Dover's side, you know, whether it's facial recognition or fingerprint or stamping their passports, all this kind of stuff, it means they have to get out of the car. Like, you literally have to turn Dover into like an airport where people need to get out and go through a certain procedures. That's literally what they have to do, but they can't see to do. But it's just too much. It's too much for them. It's too much for them, and that's why we're getting overwhelmed and we keep having this problem. And the people of Dover as well, for the innocent people of Dover here, they're the ones who are going to suffer as a result of this as well, because their town consistently has all these backlog of vehicles and that just trying to get in as well, and that's not fair on them as well. So this is a lose-lose situation. So as much as you want to delay it, how much more delaying can we really do, guys? I think that's the honest question we need to ask ourselves. So tourists heading to Europe could face waits of up to 14 hours at the border controls under a scheme to be launched in October, MPs have been told. The Port of Dover and the surrounding area could face significant disruption when the EU entry-exit system is introduced, unless measures are taken to prevent delays, Parliament's European Scrutiny Committee has heard. Ashford Borough Council, responsible for Dover, told the committee the 14-hour queues were a reasonable worst-case scenario if the scheme was implemented as planned. Okay, so they're saying it's the reasonable worst-case scenario. The controls are require people entering the EU to register their fingerprints and a photograph alongside their passport. There have been multiple episodes of gridlock traffic at the Port of Dover and surroundings in roads in recent years, with post-Brexit checks added to waiting times. The tourist organisation Visit Kent expressed concerns that delays caused by the new system could have a knock-on effect on local businesses, which had been affected during the previous period of disruptions. Ashford Council said the 14-hour delays at the port were likely to lead at queues along the A20 and M20 that could block access to staff and tourist traffic at Eurotunnel in Folkestone. The Eurostar said without upgrades there could be queues in terminals of more than an hour at peak times. HS1, which runs UK's high-speed rail service, said the decision not to enable online pre-registration would put enormous pressure on infrastructure at St Pancras International. Again, you need to have these things in place, because it's not a, we don't have freedom of movement. See, they have to have these things in place to enter Europe now. They have to have them. Downing Street sought to downplay the risk of delays. A number 10 spokesperson said, on some of those scenarios, rightly, we are not going to get into hypotheticals about delays, but there are tried and tested contingency plans in place, and a lot of work is managed by the Kent Resilient Forums. So we will make sure that we are prepared, and our focus remains on ensuring that the scheme does not unnecessarily impact local communities and result in delays for travellers. We are working very closely, as you would expect, with the French, with all the port authorities to ensure travellers and passengers do not experience unnecessary delays. That work continues. The voice of the committee, Sir Bill Cash, said queues of more than 14 hours, vehicles backed up along the main road, businesses have starved of footfall. This eventually paints an alarming picture of possible risks surrounding the entry-exit system implementation. Clearly, this policy could have a very serious impact not only for tourists and for travel operators, but also for local businesses. I implore business decision makers on both sides of the channel to take note of this evidence. This scheme is due to be implemented in October. The clock is ticking, and these issues must be urgently addressed. They must be urgently addressed. That is true. But how they're going to approach this, I don't know. It just feels like it's an impossible challenge for them. It's going to be really, really a frustrating one, to say the least. And we're going to be talking about it again, guys. We are going to be talking about it again. There's going to be some first changes coming in. Excuse me. There'll be some first changes coming into play at the end of January as well. For the first of import checks into the United Kingdom from the EU side as well. So the first stages of it. So we'll see how that goes as well. So more news on Brexit is not going away. It's not just what polls and what analysts are saying. It's, you know, there are still things as part of the Brexit deal that was agreed by Boris Johnson that still needs to be implemented on our side. Oh yeah, that's right. You guys totally forgot about that, didn't some of you Brexiteers forgot about that, didn't you? But you know, sovereignty. It's worth its sovereignty. So the next one we got, guys, is from Sky News. So Lloyds Banking Group is to cut 1,600 jobs as it shifts to online banking. There will be a net loss of 769 roles at the UK's largest mortgage lender, as 830 new positions will be part of the strategy. So we know that banks now are becoming less and less frequent on our high streets, and more of them are turning to online. This is another way of them also continuing to make profit, and also less and less people are reliant on banks in and of themselves. One of Labour's proposals, and as far as I'm aware, they still have plans to implement this if they get into power, is to have what they call banking hubs around the UK. Now, what is a banking hub? A banking hub would be basically a place where everybody can go if they need help specifically regarding their bank, so that they have a place to go to if they have problems when it comes to online banking, which I think is a very good and a good idea. Originally, I wasn't sure about it at first. But reading more into it, I think it's a very good idea. It's this a kind of a banking hub, especially in local areas, and that especially if you're in a rural area and your high street doesn't have many banks, if not any banks, you know, especially for much older people who still rely on going into the bank as opposed to not knowing how to use online banking. I think that really is playing a factor into it. Yes, of course, everyone should have access in there. Everyone should have access to online banking, but not everyone can. We're not at that point just yet. We are near it. We're not exactly at the point where everyone has it. I mean, if we all had free internet, maybe it would be a different story. But for these banks now, it's becoming less. It's not beneficial for them to have so many store banks now. A lot of banks just don't see the benefits of them. So we need to give people a place to go to when it comes to issues and things regarding banking, at least in their towns and rural communities and areas, because this is going to continue. This is not just them; it's lots of other banks and building societies that are looking at cutting away and getting rid of their banks because they're not worth it in terms of a money situation. I mean, what is the point of having a bank in a rural area if you're only going to get the few odd people turning up in there because the vast majority bank online? Then it becomes null and void, and those people, you know, eventually, inevitably, they are going to lose their jobs, sadly. It is frustrating, I know, But I do think this banking hub idea that Labour have, I think it could be it could really make a difference in terms of a community aspect as well. For local towns and rural areas especially. Banks will still have their will still have. I still think the vast majority of banks will still have their places in major towns and cities in most cases. But many rural areas and that they'll be losing them if they've not already lost them. To be fair. So Lloyds Banking Group is to cut about 1,600 jobs across its branch network as it continues to shift its business towards online banking. Some 830 new roles will be part of the strategy, resulting in a net reduction of 769 jobs. We're introducing a number of new roles and making changes to our branch team so that our customers can see how and when they want to, a spokesperson said. Some staff will be offered voluntary redundancy, but most junior employees will be expected not to be affected by the losses. The new jobs will be customer facing and providing services across branches via video messages and over the phone. Yeah, so they will try to do things more via internet and all that kind of stuff as opposed to face to face in the branches, which is, as I said, which is what's becoming the more norm now. Only 8% of customers choose to visit the high street branches as the only way to manage their money, while more than 21 million customers use online or mobile banking, Lloyds Banking Group said on Thursday. Lloyds, in common with other major high street banks, has been closing branches across the country. As I said, yeah, they're not the only ones, and we know that. The group is the UK's biggest mortgage lender, and its subsidies including the Bank of Scotland and Halifax. In November, Lloyds said it was shutting another 45 branches across its network, meaning that at least 275 branches will be cut across Lloyds, Halifax and Bank of Scotland over 2023-2024. The closure of 40 Lloyds and Halifax sites were announced last January. Branches to be shut have been seen a number of visit drops by an average of 60% in the last 5 years, the companies have said at the time. Yeah, like I said, less and less people are going to bank branches. The latest financial results shows a rise in profits amid high interest rates. The group reported their pre-tax profits of £5.728 billion for the ninth month ending in September. Higher base interest rates set by the Bank of England have yielded £13.7 billion income and a 7% increase from a year earlier. Like I said, this is inevitable, guys. We know this is going to be coming across. There are still going to be some like I said, in like the major cities and that, but for some people they have to travel very, very far to go to a bank now. And obviously the concern is the more senior and more elderly people, out of respect to them, because they don't use online banking or they don't know how to use it, and they're the ones who are going to need assistance. But I think this idea that Labour have looked into of a banking community hub thing, it wouldn't be for one specific bank, it would be for multiple banks in rural areas. I think it's a great idea. Obviously, we'll have to see more details as it comes along, because I think I've talked about it before. But yeah, there are still obviously people out there who still need to, whatever the reason is, they still need to go to a bank and speak to people, because that face-to-face is still important. But obviously, for many of us and younger people now, it's all about it on the online now. Guys, while you're here, make sure you hit the like button. It'd be greatly appreciated. Share it across social media so other people are notified of this, are aware of this video, and subscribe, because it really does help support the channel, guys. So it's not just about one news story. We cover multiple news stories here in this video, guys, just so you are aware. So there's plenty more of us to talk about, including this one from the BBC, guys. I didn't think I'd be talking about Scotland, but there you go. Nicola Sturgeon called Boris Johnson a clown. An inquiry hears. So this is regarding the coronavirus public inquiry is being conducted in Scotland. And if you haven't seen the clip, guys, go out of your way to see the clip. There was a WhatsApp exchange between these two here, which we'll read in just a moment. But essentially, when Boris Johnson was announcing the second COVID lockdown, she basically said didn't just call Boris Johnson a clown, she called him, how can I put this without swearing, an effing clown. Yeah, it was, and to be fair, like, she's not even speaking for herself, she's speaking on behalf of the entire nation of Scotland and the vast majority of people in the United Kingdom when they talk about Boris Johnson and what a clown he is. So to be fair, it's not like she's misleading in her messages. She's being open and honest, and I think, you know what, We agree with her. So let's read into it a bit, guys. Nicola Sturgeon called Boris Johnson a effing clown. It wasn't just a clown, it was an effing clown. In explicit laden text conversation with her chief of staff, the UK COVID inquiry has heard. The inquiry has shown messages in which the former First Minister described as excruciating a Downing Street announcement about a senior COVID lockdown in England. Mrs. Sturgeon said she was offended by Mr. Johnson's utter incompetence. Her former aide said the language showed Mr. Sturgeon's frustration. Yeah, it was frustrating for her because the communication was so crap between Westminster and Scotland's government, and also with Mark Drakeford in Wales. It has been like, I haven't covered it from Scotland and Wales perspective, but we know that the communication was bad from Westminster. They were not communicating at all well enough. It was ridiculous. Mr. Johnson, who was Prime Minister during the pandemic, said he had a friendly relationship with Mrs. Sturgeon. The same Mrs. Sturgeon that told him, that said to I'm sorry, try not to laugh. The same friendly relationship where Mrs. Sturgeon said that he was an effing. Yeah, okay. It came as First Minister Hamza Yousaf, who also gave evidence to the inquiry on Thursday, announced an extremely led in review into the Scottish Government's use of the mobile messaging app, conceding that there are challenges in relation to how the app is used in government. He concedes that the handling of requests of WhatsApp messages had not been the government's finest hour and had not given bereaved families confidence. Yeah, I mean, they understand that they should not be using WhatsApp messages, they should be using alternative means. Westminster don't see it that way, but yeah, Scotland, I think the Scottish Government are aware they should not have been using WhatsApp messages. It's not really the most appropriate way of dealing with discussing things. But to be fair, I would say that I'm only speaking out of basically what I hear from the two Davies and a few other Scottish people, but they're nowhere near on incompetent and incapable as they are in Westminster. And most of the information stuff that they come out has been pretty accurate when it comes to what's happened in Scotland when it comes to the coronavirus. Liz Lloyd, who served as Chief of Staff and Strategic Advisor to Mrs. Sturgeon between 2015 and 2023, said engagement with Mr. Johnson became pointless in the early months of the pandemic. Speaking at the inquiry, which is currently sitting in Edinburgh, she was showing messages on the 31st of October between her and Mr. Sturgeon on the same evening as Mr. Johnson announced a fresh lockdown in England. Mrs. Sturgeon said his address to the nation was explicitly excruciating and that the UK government's communications were awful. She told Mrs. Lloyd, his utter incompetence in every sense is now offending me on behalf of politicians everywhere. Mrs. Lloyd said she was offended on behalf of all special advisors, to which Mrs. Sturgeon replied, he's an effing clown. I think BBC are trying to change it to make it say it was actually he was an effing clown is what was actually said, but the BBC are not going to say that, obviously, because we know that BBC is a bit biased when it comes to news in Scotland, let's be clear. Mrs. Lloyd told the inquiry the conversation was a result of chaos in the UK government. She said the Scottish government had to mitigate that because although the restrictions did not apply in Scotland, they had an effect on how people north of the border viewed the pandemic. They were clearly not very complimentary about their communications handling that day, she told the inquiry. No, I wouldn't be surprised. Asked if the relationship between Miss Sturgeon and Mr. Johnson had broken down, Mr. Lloyd replied, I think broken down to a degree overstates that was there to break. She said that there was a politeness between the two leaders they had previously met, but the relationship became much harder during the pandemic. Mrs. Lloyd claimed that during talks with devolved leaders that Mr. Johnson did not want to be on those calls, and he wasn't necessarily well briefed on those calls. He wasn't listening to the points that were making on those calls. I think engagement with him came to be seen as slightly pointless during that period, she added. The inquiry heard as early as March 2020 that Mrs. Lloyd had described COBRA, the UK government emergency response committee, as a shambles. She said in broad terms there was better communication between the two governments, particularly on health, but that discussion with the Prime Minister didn't get us anywhere. Mr. Johnson was quizzed about his relationship with Mrs. Sturgeon when he appeared in front of the COVID inquiry in December. When I have talked to her, we have gotten on very well and had a friendly relationship, he said. The inquiry also heard that Mrs. Lloyd told Mr. Sturgeon in WhatsApp messages that she wanted a good old-fashioned rammy with the UK government so she could think about something other than sick people. Mrs Lloyd told Mr Sturgeon that she had set a timetable for the UK government to answer the Scottish government on furlough as a purely political move in a message between herself and the First Foreign Minister on November 1st of November 2020. Mr Sturgeon said, "Yeah, I get it, and it might be worth doing. I sent a rough formulation of what might be said tomorrow." Mr Sturgeon expects to give evidence to the inquiry this week. As I said, there is a bit of bias from the BBC towards Scotland, so we have because of so we have to be careful about what this article states. I am just going to put that out there, but I just wanted to more home in on the fact that to emphasise the relationship between Scotland and between the Scottish government and the Westminster was just really little to not there, and even at times Mark Drakeford had shown that he was infuriated by Boris Johnson and his side as well. There was that as well, which was incredibly infuriating as well. So it's Scotland handled it to the very best of their abilities. I think it's the best way to respond to it, based on the knowledge that I have with regards to them. Nicola Sturgeon received a high amount of praise from the Scottish people when it comes to her handling of it, and she and her government did what they possibly could under the circumstances. Well, obviously did not help that the nations were not united in this situation, because regardless of what political differences are, this was a global pandemic, and everybody should be working together to ensure they reduce the amount of deaths as possible. And we already know from the COVID inquiry that's been reported in Westminster how poor things were handled from Westminster. We already know that. We've seen sufficient evidence of that. Never mind just Partygate, which was also infuriating. We could tell that the communications were bad. So Mark Drakeford and Nicola Sturgeon were absolutely tearing their hair out. When it comes to communications with them and Westminster, it was just a frustration to say the least, guys. But I'm glad she spoke her mind, because that's how a lot of people, the general public, feel about Boris Johnson, the way he handled it, guys. So this next one I've got for you guys is from iNews. The headline is Labour's spending trap, reversing Tory tax cuts or slash public services. So the one-party graduate who served under Tony Blair urged the party not to commit to matching Conservative tax plans. And the thing is that we honestly don't know what the finances are going to be like if Labour do come into power, and when the general election is going to be called at the time of this recording. Like I said, things can possibly change, so we shouldn't jump to conclusions on this. It's an interesting one from iNews, really, because I don't know if the only spending trap I see right now is obviously the Green Prosperity Plan, which again they have rolled things back on. And obviously I know many people who are subscribers of my channel are very sceptical of Labour, and rightly so. And I have my scepticism of Labour too, and I don't blame people for feeling that way. But we have to choose between them and the Conservatives, and I think I know what the vast majority of us would want to choose right now. Are they going to slash public services? I don't think they're going to slash public services. I really don't think that. Reversing Tory tax cuts. Those tax cuts are specifically for the rich anyway, so we should be taxing the rich anyway. But there are lots of ways that the Labour can easily generate revenue without the need of taking it out of public purse. But let's read into what they're saying anyway, regardless. Labour will have to cut public services after the next general election if it accepts Conservative tax plans and then takes power, Keir Starmer has been warned. A senior member of Tony Blair's cabinet has urged Starmer not to commit to matching the Tories' tax plan. The veteran Labour politician told the it is already alienating activists and the left, and people are asking what's the point. If they follow that, the thing is that they need to differentiate themselves from the Conservatives a lot more, and there are times where they don't differentiate themselves, and too many times they do come across a bit more red Tories, and I'm hearing that a lot. And to be honest, I'm inclined to agree with them at times. There is those points where they do come across like that. But that's not to say that they're not. Obviously, we don't know what they're going to be like when they're in power, because as of right now, they're not in power. And just because they have the poll leads, guys. I've said it before and I've said it again. Don't assume Labour are guaranteed this win. The polls will narrow between Conservatives and Labour. It will happen. Why people will vote Conservative? Because people will just do it. social media and propaganda out there, misinformation, that kind of stuff is going to go more and more into overdrive as a general election is announced, and people will buy into it, and people will still vote Conservative, regardless of the fact that they're burning the entire United Kingdom to the ground, or specifically England. People will still vote for them, and that's the absolute truth. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but to be honest, people will start vote Conservative. Yes, some people will vote Reform instead, but the idea that Labour are looking to copy and replicate some of Conservatives' ideas, yeah, this is a great deal of concern. But the senior figure added that if Sir Keir Starmer refuses to reverse any tax cuts in the upcoming budget, we will have a big problem with public services. The comments follow a major report by the Institute of Physical Studies, the IFS, which concluded on Thursday that any tax cuts to taxes would inevitably have to be reversed in future if public spending is not to fall too. He said the next government would inherit one of the worst economics since the 50s and find it harder to tackle the public debt than any other living memory. Both Sir Keir and Rishi Sunak were urged to level with voters and be honest about the trade-offs with tax cuts and public spending. The current government rejects the analysis, however, insisting its economic policies would boost growth while making public services more efficient. Government insiders reject the ISS analysis, arguing that Jeremy Hunt's fiscal plans would provide higher real terms funding for services while reducing the tax burden. An ongoing review of Whitehall effectively is intended to drive up productivity without increasing costs. Asked about the think tank report, a Number 10 spokesman said, "We don't agree with some of the analysis. We think that we have created the right conditions to enable us to cut taxes with the tax changes coming into force." I have screamed and shouted about how tax cuts are not what people need right now. People need money in their pockets. Labour said it will not be necessary to increase taxes in order to fund services, even though Keir Starmer has admitted he expects the Conservatives to salt the ground with spending traps before the next election. Left-wing grassroots campaign groups Momentum warned that Labour leader was clinging to failed to Tory economic plans and called for a broader public spending plan. Spokesperson for the findings show just how out of touch in reality that our political class is in obsession with tax cuts for the rich. With a tax burden in fact middling the European standards and cash-starved public services on their knees, it's no wonder polling shows that the public overwhelmingly back investment in public services over tax cuts, and in fact favours increasing taxes over the wealthiest would help pay for it. Yeah, we've said this a number of times. If you tax the rich, yeah, we can create more revenue, yeah, that we can put into our public services. And it won't hurt the rich. We know it won't hurt the rich. Yet the Labour leader clings to the failed Tory economic plans. James McDonnell, who serves as Shadow Chancellor under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, told the eye that the country needed redistribution through taxation to improve public services. After 14 years of austerity everywhere you look at, public services are in crisis. People know this, so one step is don't insult their intelligence, he said. IFS economics Ben Cesaro said reducing debt is probably more difficult over the next parliament than any other period since the 50s. A combination of high debt and slow GDP growth makes it hard to cut taxes without affecting services, the think tank warned. Labour has promised to bring down the national debt as a share of the GDP over a 5-year time frame and not to borrow to fund day-to-day spending. The Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has rejected calls to raise taxes in order to pay for higher spending, other than a small number of specific tax increases such as imposing VAT on private school fees. She said last week, "I would like taxes to be lower on working people." So Keir has admitted if he becomes Prime Minister, he will face a tricky physical situation, referring to the Conservatives, he told reporters on Wednesday. "I think it's very obvious that they're trying to salt the ground, that they're not acting in the national interest. They're acting in the party's interest." They breathed the autumn financial statement out of a series of chats to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. Yeah, they are trying to trap them. We know that they're looking to trap them. Internal Treasury analysis suggests Mr Hunt will have around £14 billion of headroom at the next budget to increase borrowing without breaking the physical rules. That would enable him to announce modest tax cuts, including a freeze on fuel duty. Medium-term spending plans imply that most Whitehall departments will have to make cuts to their budgets in real term in order to fund higher spending on the NHS, childcare and defence. Well, they're going to have to find it somewhere, guys. They're going to have to find it somewhere, Labour. Because we are suffering, and Labour we're going to need to find money somewhere. The public services are suffering as a result of this, guys. They are suffering as a result of this. They are suffering, and they need they need sorry, so I've got a text message. My apologies. They need help. They just need help, guys. And we only need to look at the bankruptcy that we have been going through. It's just really, really heartbreaking, because these councils are in desperate need of help, and it just feels like they're turning a blind eye. And while, yes, the Conservatives did announce some extra money recently from Michael Gove, it's nowhere near enough money. These councils need money. Public services need direct injections of cash. They really, really do, and not just the next amount of increase. It needs significant, massive increase, guys. So we're going to take a little breaky up here in the Regan's news round. We'll normally drop a funny story in between, guys. So this one here for you. Hope you guys like this one. Navine Boris's reaction to TalkTV's Axe show. This is a parody, guys, just in case. But I hope you guys find this funny.
Oh hi, it's me, Navine Borries, and I just want to say to all of you, screw you! Like, I'm not even bothered about the fact that I've been booted off TalkTV. It doesn't bother me at all. Because clearly it's all a part of the plot anyway. It's the cabal, the conspiracy trying to take me down. Read about it in my new book, The Plot, out now. Because there's literally no other reason that I should be booted off that programme, because I'm really good at what I do. And do you know what? Nobody can hold me down. Well, apart from BJ. But me and Liz, we will be back. We're like sisters, well, apart from the time that we hate each other, but we are going out on the town tonight. Do you know what? Just like Taylor Swift says, haters gonna hate. And do you know what? We don't care if you hate us, because we're gonna paint the town blue. That's right. Tonight is about us, not about any of you. It is only about us. Actually, I probably should contact BJ, shouldn't I? Should I give him a call first? Yeah, I'll do that, and then we'll go out.
Why won't she go away, guys? Why won't she go away? She won't go away at all, will she? Guys, while you're here, make sure you hit the like button and share it across social. Excuse me. My apologies there. If you can, hit the like button and share across social media, all that stuff, guys, and subscribe, because it really does help support the channel. Right, next one we got is from The Independent, you guys. So the headline is assaults in women's prisons triple in more than a decade to hit a record high, with more violence than in men's jails. The broken system is letting women down at every turn, and experts have warned. We already know from stories that I've covered, guys, with regards to prison services, we know that prisons are overcrowded, and it's becoming much harder. And you know, the morale in prisons, especially with people who work a part of them, is really, really low. But we've never really directly covered anything. I haven't really covered any prisons directly with regards to women's prisons. So this is my first time covering an article with regards to women's prisons as opposed to men's prisons, because normally the ones they talk about prisons overall, it's normally about the men's ones that you hear more about than women's ones. But this headline here that there's more assaults in women's than in men's, it's a great deal of concern. And what is being done to address this situation is the question that I'm asking. So let's read into it. So women's jails are the most violent they have ever been, with assaults tripling in a decade to hit an all-time high, according to shameful new figures laying bare the havoc and despair in Britain's overcrowding prison systems. With 488 assaults for every 1,000 inmates, the rate of violence in the 3,600 strong women prison estate saw a total of 1,630 assaults in the year to September, which is now far worse than among men, where the rate is 40% lower. While serious violence has historically been much worse than men's prisons, the rate in the women's estate is now almost identical for the first time, with 110 serious assaults, 39 of them against prison staff. In the one instance illustrating the link between violence and unmet mental health needs, the report in May in the Independent Monitoring Board, 2 women with mental health needs to be housed in the segregation unit at Peterborough were said to be so violent that it took 4 officers to unlock their cells. Steve Gilligan, the Prison Officers Association chief, told The Independent, "Many of our members are facing life-changing injuries, and something needs to change dramatically of how our prisons are run." How much have I talked about times where I said about the rehabilitation and the mental health aspect of these things, guys. Rehabilitation is vital when it comes to prison services. What is the point of having people in prison and then you're looking to let them, and then once they do their time, to let them out, if they've not had any rehabilitation whatsoever? That is the part of the system that really does matter. And I really do question how much of that is being implemented, not just here, but in all prison services up and down the country. And yes, like everything else, they all require funding, but this is a necessary funding, because you want to what you want from people who have committed crimes and those who are behind bars, you want them to be rehabilitated and then be able to come back out of that rehabilitated new person, not wanting to commit crimes and actually want to contribute to society. That's what we want. That's what we want. Is that not what we want? Yeah, from them when they've committed crimes. And if the rehabilitation system is not there, what are we doing? What are we doing here? Because all you're going to end up doing is having them going back out into the real world, committing crimes and whatnot, and then they're going to be back in jail again. And with regards to mental health, there needs to be plenty of support and help, yeah, for those who do have those mental health issues as well. What is being done here as well? How many times have I talked about mental health, guys? Overcrowding and understaffing with no meaningful activity for prisoners leads to our members being assaulted on a regular basis, he added. It's totally unacceptable, and we call on the HMPPS and government to deal with it robustly so that our members are safe at work. Self-harm has also skyrocketed in women's prisons by 38% to a new peak of 5,988 incidents per 1,000 prisoners, 10 times higher than the men's prisoners state, despite self-harm and suicide both rising among men too, with 19 men dying by suicide in the past year. Campbell, chief executive of the major prison charity NAGCO, said, "These figures paint a damning picture of a broken system which is letting women down at every turn." I wonder if Rory Stewart's going to comment on this, on the rest of his politics, if it's put to him. You know, he was a former prison minister. He spoke deeply about how much he cared about the prison system, and whether you believe him or not. But it did give a bit of an insight of what it's like to be a prisoner minister. I just had that thought in my mind. Behind the shocking rise in self-harm and assaults are women who are desperate and deeply traumatised. The vast majority of women who are sent to prisons for non-violent offences, yet a prison sentence sets off a grenade in their lives. They lose their job, home, children, and then at this time of crisis they're thrown into inherently traumatising environments of prison. Many women end up in prison after falling through the cracks of other social services, as said Priya Sangha, chief executive of the Prison Reform Trust. With prisons expected to deal with the consequences of a woeful lack of inadequate mental health provisions in the community. They are often victims of crime and abuse and often suffer from complex mental health problems and drug addiction. Of course, there's drug addiction as well, added Andrea Kumar KC, chief executive of the Howard League for Mental Reform. Echoing concerns over prisoners being used as a so-called place for safety for women, Ms. Kumar told The Independent, too often shortages in hospital places and community interventions mean that vulnerable women are ended up in jails instead of getting support. Once behind bars, overcrowding and understaffing in jails mean prisoners are given less meaningful activity and time out of their cells, while often being unable to access the mental health support they need, experts warn. Violence often arises when severity distressed women are having to live their conditions that re-trigger the drama of abuse and neglect of many of them have experienced, said Mrs. Singh. Despite all their best efforts, prison staff are not equipped to provide specialist trauma-informed services. When prisons are this overcrowded, they become completely ill-equipped to deal with the scale of the trauma and despair among the prison population. Self-inflicted deaths, self-harm and assaults are all up, said Mrs. Singer, adding, "We are failing these women and staff that work with them." Kate, who was on 7 weeks pregnant and on antidepressants when she was sent to prison, told The Independent, "On arrival, I was told that I needed to wait to see the routine doctor. That was 2 weeks. 2 weeks of being locked in a cell, worried I'd be attacked, spiraling thoughts, withdrawing from medication, worrying how I'd cope with the sentence that sprung on me, pregnant with my first baby and no idea what to expect." It's suffocating, it's terrifying. Nobody checked in with me. Nobody knew I'd suffered with severe depression or had been in suicidal a few years before I entered prison. I was left behind a sealed door. The doctors didn't offer me any therapy or alternative counselling. I was put back on antidepressants, but the issue at hand wasn't met, and I wasn't supported in the most challenging part of my life, when I was the most vulnerable. See, why are these questions not being asked about prisoners? Why are these questions not being asked? Who's responsible for it? Another former prisoner described being put in high-pressure, dangerous situations and in dangerous environments consistently when she first remained remanded in prison. She said she was not surprised by the rise in self-harm, warning there isn't enough resources in prison for people with mental health needs. It's not a safe place for them to be. Women in their early 20s are most vulnerable to self-harm in prison, according to recent research by the Agenda Alliance. Indy Cross, the charity chief executive, said, "We know they do this to cope with the pain of the past, such as domestic abuse, poverty, addiction. Prison worsens these problems, heaping homelessness, unemployment and child removal onto complex sets of problems they already face." Describing assaults as regrettable, flip side and unaddressed mental health problems, lack of meaningful activity and trauma-informed staff training. Mrs. Cross warned that without tailored support, these kinds of figures will persist. "How many times do we need to keep hearing such horror stories?" she said, adding, "There's no more time to wait. The time to act is now." While the government committed 6 years ago to significantly reducing the women's prison population, the Howard League warned the current plans to expand the prison system, including a projected 40% rise in the number of women behind bars, in a system that's clearly unable to meet their complex needs. Kirsty Kitchen, head of policy at the charity Birth Companion, said the exponential rise in self-harm rates means there can be no more excuses for the government's failure to deliver on these commitments. Ms. Kitchen's adding, "But we mustn't only look at what's happening inside the prisons, but we need investment in mental health services on the communities too. So prisons are not used as a place of safety of alternatives, and so that women can get the support that they need when they need to, and avoid criminalisation in the first place." Warning that our prisons are at breaking point, Ruth Caberly, Labour's shadow prison minister, told The Independent that the rise in violence was yet another sign of a crisis that our prison estate, with both prison staff and prisoners at serious risk. Yeah. A Ministry of Justice spokesperson said the number of women in prison has fallen dramatically since 2010, and we're committed to invest millions into community services to steer female offenders away from jail and help get their lives back on track. Well, if they've fallen dramatically, why are we having so many issues then? However, for these women who have committed crimes which warrant a contextual sentence, sorry, I try not to sneeze, my apologies, many of whom have complex needs, we are transforming the mental health on offer in our jails, including tailored around-the-clock care, extra face-to-face time with specialist staff, and improved self-harm training for frontline officers. And just to put there, guys, they're not the actual names that were used in, were different ones. Just for reference as well, if you're experiencing feelings of distress or struggling with cope, you can speak to the Samaritans in confidence in 116123 in the UK and the Republic of Ireland, and there's email as well at joe@samaritans.org, or visit the Samaritans website to find out details of your nearest branch if you guys ever need to talk to them. It so frustrates me seeing not just the prisoners, but these prison officers facing relentless troubles every single day. It's an extremely tough job for them. It really, really is, and I feel for them having to deal with these situations. My only hope is that when the Labour government comes in, they will look at this and deal with this accordingly in a proactive manner. I don't think money is just the thing that can solve this. I think it's just the case what systems of rehabilitations and what are we doing to address these issues, and are there issues being concerned and being looked at. There's just, again, another situation where I find myself thinking too many questions and not enough answers. And the government saying that the government there just seems like it's just throwing another line there. But we can only hope that Labour have a plan to deal with it, that's for sure. So the next one we got to you guys is an exclusive from Open Democracy. The headline is Rwandan homes praised by Braverman won't even go to asylum seekers. Beautiful flats that the Home Secretary said would house deported asylum seekers have been sold, the developers have said. Yeah, that's right. So us, our taxpayer money that went towards building accommodation for asylum seekers in Rwanda, apparently, yeah, those developments have been sold. Apparently, they've been sold. That we paid for. We taxpayers have paid for these homes in Rwanda. Yeah, just let that sink in for a second. Homes that Suella Braverman claimed that house asylum seekers deported to Rwanda have already been sold, Open Democracy can reveal. The then Home Secretary toured the Riverside estate in Rwanda's capital, Kigali, last year during an official visit aimed at promoting the UK's controversial asylum deal with the African country. While being shown around the state, Braverman praised the homes as really beautiful, and she said she really liked the decor so much that she wanted to hire an interior designer for her own house. But an undercover Open Democracy reporter posed as an international investor was told by the developer's sales team that asylum seekers would not be housed there. So these homes that we paid for to put them in, we're now being told that they're not going to be housed for them, even if they were going to get shifted there. So what are we spending our taxpayers' money for, guys? The houses are for Rwandans and 50% is already sold. So if you say it's for refugees, I don't think so, said the sales advisor at the ADHI Rwanda. Two separate members of staff at the Century Real Estate, which is selling the properties in the Borries estate, also told Open Democracy reporter that the homes were not intended for refugees. They are selling them for people who want to own them. They are not fully furnished, and I don't know how they could be used for asylum seekers, one real estate agent had said. One other told Open Democracy that, contrary to Braverman's claims, the estate was not on the list of potential properties that could house asylum seekers from the UK. So why was she put there? Why was she basically shown around these places then? Another question. The Rwanda Housing Authority, the government body, said it commissioned ADHI Rwanda to build Borries Riverside Estate in November 2020, and that the project was designed primarily with first-time owners in mind. The UK government agreed its migration and economic development partnership with Rwanda in 2022. Okay, but these houses, were they paid for by UK taxpayer? That's what I want to know. Did we pay for them? Did we pay for them, us taxpayer? I want to know if that's true or not. In June, ADHI said the project would redefine luxury living and they had already captivated the attention of discerning home buyers and investors alike. Real Estates told Open Democracy that more than half of the 257 housing units have been sold. Braverman said in March that Rwanda could resettle many thousands of people under its agreement with the UK. See, you see that there. This is the sales team at the developers that built the Borries estate told Open Democracy homes had already been sold. And you can see there's Suella Braverman there. That's the estate that they've... So either this was a PR stunt to make it look like the homes were good, or she was lied to. She was lied to on that occasion. So we don't know that for certain. The former Home Secretary was also filmed laying the first bricks at the second housing development in Gangwa outside of Kigali, which he described as a UK-funded project that would provide 528 homes for asylum seekers. Gahawa's building project represents a big step forward in Rwanda, increasing its already existing capacity to accommodate refugees and provide humanitarian support to thousands of people across the country, Braverman said in a speech earlier before the groundbreaking ceremony. 10 months later, it remains unclear if any more bricks have been added to those laid by the former Home Secretary. A developer building homes in the same neighbourhood Braverman visited told Open Democracy's undercover reporter that construction was on hold because the company had run out of cash. Okay, so it was the company building it, not the British taxpayer? They also said Rwandan ministers had told them that their homes were too expensive to buy for asylum seekers from the UK. But if they build cheaper units in the future, they would consider buying these. Asked if when the next developer in another area or another estate should include homes for lower income earners that cost them 40 million Rwandan francs, that's 24,500. If they can finance them, the director said. In a video shared by the Home Office in March, Braverman said that the housing project she visited in the UK was being supported by the UK. It is unclear whether this involved financial support. Okay, so we don't know if we actually financially supported these directly. The UK government said it had paid 240 million to Rwanda so far, but with further payments of 50 million expected in 2024-2025 financial year. But its plans to deport asylum seekers remain uncertain. We know that. In December, the Supreme Court ruled that the proposals were unlawful because Rwanda is not a safe country for asylum seekers. The government succeeded last week in passing a bill that would override the court by declaring the country safe in the Commons, but it is yet to face scrutiny from the peers in the House of Lords who could reject the proposal. Neither the Home Office nor the Rwandan government responded to requests for comment. No, I wonder why they don't want a request for comment on something that Open Democracy seemed to may have caught on to something here potentially. So, yeah. So what's my final thoughts on it? I mean, on the final thoughts on that, I mean, it's just infuriating, guys. It really does infuriate me. It grinds my gears. Lots of anger. I want to shout and swear, but it's just again like this. We are just wasting taxpayer money, guys. We are wasting taxpayer money. It really, really is frustrating to say the least, guys. And it's so annoying. This whole thing. I mean, it's not going to work. We know it's not going to work, but the very fact that some of that money is could have been used towards these homes that end up just being for not even for people of Rwanda, and it's just like, why? Just why? Again, it's so infuriating. All right, one more news to go for you guys from Byline Times. If you can, again, reminder, hit the like button, share across social media, and hit the subscribe button. That really would help support the channel. The headline from Byline Times on this one is Ireland takes the UK government to the European Court over controversial Northern Ireland legislation at little notice move. A law granting immunity to perpetrators during the Troubles was passed despite overwhelming opposition from parties in Northern Ireland and the Irish government. So I'm going to have to read into this before I give my initial thoughts to give me a better understanding of this stuff, guys, because I have not been looking at this much at all, if I'm honest. So in a move that has so far flown under the radar, Ireland has launched a legal challenge against the UK at the European Court of Human Rights, the ECHR, over plans to grant immunity to those who commit murders and tortures during the Troubles. Right, so straight away, right off the bat, that's wrong. It's not right that those who commit atrocities on both sides, I'm going to say both sides, because there were atrocities on both sides, guys. It's not right that those who commit them should be allowed to walk away from them in any way, shape or form. Justice needs to be made on both sides of this during those Troubles. They really do. And the UK are wrong to do this. I'm sorry, they're wrong to do this. They should not have granted immunity to those who committed murders and tortures. There's no justification for it, for me. I can understand why some people are saying that this is right. I can also, but like, come on, like, there's no regardless, my history is not that great when it comes to the Troubles. But what I will say before I keep reading on this is that if they have caused abhorrent acts of murder and torture and violence, they shouldn't be allowed to get away with it. I'm sorry. You just can't be allowed to walk away from it. What infuriates me is that it's 2024 and we're still having these discussions. It's 2024. Why are we still not dealing with this? Why are people still not paying for the crimes that have been committed? It's the victims I feel for in all of these. The case, launched on the 19th of January, targets the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act of 2023, marking a rare instance of a country directly challenging another's primary legislation on human rights grounds. It was spotted by legal writer David Alan Green. The announcement was made quietly through a tweet linking to a press release, but its implications could be far-reaching. This action by Ireland reflects the strong links between the European Convention of Human Rights, the ECHR, and the Good Friday Agreement that landmarks the 1990s peace accord. The ECHR is integral to this agreement as it provides both nationalists in Northern Ireland and the Irish government, which means to uphold the basic human rights standards independent of the UK Parliament and its government's influence. Now Ireland is arguing that principle has been undermined by the green light to give to acts of murder and torture through granting immunity to participants in the Trouble. Before the acts passed in last year, the Irish Times noted that all of the North's 5 main political parties, as well as relatives and those bereaved by the troubles and victims and survivor groups, and human rights organisations opposed by the legislation. The United States and the United Nations also condemned the bill. The looming legal challenge comes as the Conservatives' right steps up its rhetoric, calling for the UK to withdraw from the ECHR. Alan Green argues that they are doing without fully considering or discussing the potential impact of the Good Friday Agreement or the UK-Ireland relationship. The legal action as interstate case is an unusual form of legal challenge at the ECHR. Typically, cases before the court involves individual applicants against member states rather than one member state confronting another. However, Ireland's decision to target the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act 2023 marks a direct confrontation with the UK's primary legislation. Former Taishkini Michael Martin, now deputy head of the Irish government, said, "I regret that we find ourselves in a position where we have where such a choice had to be made. He hit out the UK government pursuing legislation unilaterally rather than working with the Irish government or cross-party on the island." That's what they should have done. They should have worked with the Irish government to resolve this, not trying to do things behind their back. This is not. I hope that if Labour come into power, I hope they will drop this and will speak and work in cooperation with the Irish government and with and the devolved administration and those in Northern Ireland to find a more resourceful way of doing this rather than doing backhanded stuff. The British government removed the political option has left us with only this legal avenue, he said. The incorporation of the European Convention on Human Rights into Northern Ireland's law is a specific and fundamental requirement of the Good Friday Agreement. Since the UK legislation was first tabled, the government have been consistent it is not compatible with the convention. I use every opportunity to make my concerns known and urge the British government to pause this legislation. Martin added that the provisions in the Act which allow for the granting of immunity have the effects of shutting down existing venues to truth and justice for historic cases, including inquest police investigations, police ombudsman investigations and civil actions. Even in cases in which immunity is not granted, reviews by the proposed body, the Independent Commission of Reconciliation and Information Recovery, the ICRIR, are not an adequate substance for police investigations carried out independently, adequately, and with sufficient participation for the next of kin, he added. The Irish government's case is that Westminster's Northern Ireland Troubles Act stand in direct opposition to key human rights principles in potentially sanctioning atrocities. But in the statement at the end of 2023, when it became clear the Irish government would bring such a case, Westminster's Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Hinton-Harris MP said that the UK government is profoundly regrets the decision taken by the Irish government, which it brands unnecessary. The decision comes at a particularly sensitive time in Northern Ireland, he said. The UK government urged the Irish government before considering action to engage directly with the Reconciliation Commission to understand better its plans for implementation and of the legislation. Well, how much engagement have you guys done on your end? I think is the question we're asking. And he dismissed the Irish government referral to the Stormont House agreement, claiming that the reality is that there is no cross-party consensus or agreement to the practical implementation and working out of that agreement. Well, then how can they do it? Like, this is the thing that infuriates me from the UK government here. Like, you're not even discussing it with the Irish government. You're not looking at no cross-party consensus. What on earth are you doing? Like, this is not how you solve these things. You have to work with them. He said the Irish government case was undermined by the fact that at the time, since 1998, there have been any concerted or sustained attempts to be on the part of the Irish state to pursue a criminal investigation or prosecution based on the approach to the past. Successive Irish and UK governments during the peace process worked closely together on a range of initiatives which have proved conditionally immunity and early release from prison, he added. Should the Strasbourg Court find that the UK violated the ECHR with its primary legislation, the political fallout could be significant. While the ECHR cannot nullify an act of Parliament, a ruling against the UK would expect the government to undertake remedial action, a prospect that would likely spark considerable controversy within the Conservative Party. This will only cause more more people within the Conservative Party to shout, "We need to remove the ECHR. We need to remove the ECHR." When we need the ECHR here in the United Kingdom, we need it. We need those European courts of human rights to protect us from this vile political party. This is a case that is unlikely to be resolved quickly, with a judgment not likely to be due to 3 to 4 years from now. making it potentially a problem for a future Labour government, but it could become a fiercely political debate in the meantime. So what is Ireland's case? The ECHR summary. The application concerned the UK's Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act of 2023, which was signed into law on the 18th of September 2023. The state purposes of the Act is to address the legacy of the troubles and conflict in Northern Ireland that lasted in the late 1960s to 1998 and prominent reconciliation. The Irish government argues that certain provocations of the Act are not compatible with the UN conventions. They rely on Article 2's right to life, free prohibition to torture and inhuman or degrading treatment, 6, the right to a fair trial, 13, the right to an effective remedy, and 14, prohibition of discrimination. The Irish government alleges in particular that sections of the Act guarantee immunity from prosecution from troubles related offences, providing a certain conditions are met. Contrary to Articles 2's right to life and free provision of torture of inhumane and degrading treatment of the Convention. In addition, Parts 2 and 3 of the Act replace current mechanisms for information recovery with respect to troubles-related offences, including police investigations and cohort inquests, with a review by the newly established Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery. Contrary to Article 2's right to life, Article 3 prohibition of torture and inhuman or degrading treatment, and Article 13 right to an effective remedy. The Irish government also argues that Section 43 of the Act prevents both the initiations of the new trouble related civil actions before the court and the continuation of civil actions not commended before the 17th of May 2022, contrary to Article 6, right to a fair trial, read alone, and in conjunction with Article 14 of the Convention, prohibition of discrimination. So what are my initial thoughts on this? I think the UK government, I'm in agreement with the Irish government on this, guys. I think that the British government are wrong to try and overshadow and not look into the thing that really infuriates me the most about this is the fact that they're not even talking to the Irish government, then they're not talking to cross-party consensus. And that's the thing that really, really infuriates me more than anything. They're trying to argue that, and in the article here, they're trying to argue that it's perfectly all right, it's within our means, and it's like, no, it's not. It's not within your means. Like, in my opinion, no one should be granted immunity unless it is agreed on both the British and Irish, unless there's cross government agreements between the UK and Irish and Northern Ireland's part in this as well. There has to be that way. It has to be a cooperational agreement, and I think the ECHR are going to side with the Irish government, and rightly so. They should not be granted immunity, especially if they have committed acts of torture and murder in the troubles. I just, everyone has to pay for their crimes in any way, shape, or form, and that's my 2 cents on it, pretty much. So I will try and look into it a little bit more for people, because I know some people, because this is the first time I've really talked about the troubles in particular and about this kind of stuff, because I've never really covered it here on the channel. So, but my consensus is that if you commit crimes, you should pay for them. But in a topic as sensitive as the troubles, and it is a very sensitive topic, this has to be consensus by the British and the Irish government, and also I would say with the devolved Northern Ireland administration as well. But there isn't. We know what's happening there right now as the time of recording. So guys, we've reached the end of Regan's news round. But just before you go, guys, I just wanted to ask you, what did you guys think of some of the stories today? Let me know some of your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on some of the news that I've covered today. We've covered a variety of topics here. Also, but just before you go as well, if you can hit the like button, share across social media, and hit that bell notification icon so you'll be notified when I upload another video. And of course, if you want to financially support me and the work that I do here, you can join the YouTube membership for as little as 99p, or join me for exclusive content on Patreon as well. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I hope to catch you all very, very soon.